Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the Maverick. What I thought I'd do today is show you how to rebuild the regs. So first of all, as always, any work done on your rifle is down to you, as is the power. In the UK we're bound by the sub 12 foot-pound rule. That means the muzzle energy must not exceed 12 foot-pounds. It is your legal responsibility to keep under that. Right, with that being said, one more thing. I've been hearing some rumours going around that the regs in these are fit with inferior parts. I don't know where this has come from, but what I thought I'd do is I haven't taken the reg out of this one yet. I've adjusted it, but I haven't taken it out and having a look, so we'll have a look together. I'm not sponsored or have anything to do with FX, so as I said before, I took the anti-tamper plug out of the back reg here to adjust it. I adjusted my one from 50 to 60 just to get a little extra power out of it. It was running high 10s and I wanted it to be running mid 11s, so I had to take the reg up. Now your one is going to have the anti-tamper plug fitted. So first of all, I wanted to show you how to get that off. I haven't taken the anti-tamper out the front reg, so that's what I'm going to be doing first. So before we get started, you obviously need to degas the rifle. This is done by unscrewing the bottle and dry firing it a couple times so you get rid of the air in the plenum. Ensure both the bottle gauge and the regulator gauge on the other side of the block here read 0. Once that's done, we can go ahead and take the chassis off. So we're going to need a 2.5mm Allen key first. Just undo this screw. And then a 3mm Allen key to do the rear one. Once both screws are done, you can simply lift the chassis up. Can be a little tight, so it might need a little wiggle to get it loose. And then we have our anti-tamper plug in the bottom there. Okay, so before we remove this, touching any of your anti-tampers may void your warranty. Again, that's down to you to find out and assess the risk. If you're willing to take it, then go ahead. If not, leave it to your RFD. What I like to use is a nice sharp pointy thing. This is my anti-tamper picker. As you can see there, I've sharpened the end of it. What we're going to do is we're going to poke it into the side of the Delrin bung and then lever it out. If done right, it should pop out nice and easy. So I'll try my best to give you a good look, but as you can see here, my pointy thing, I'm going to jab it into the side and lever up. So if you find the corners of the hex key, I find it's easiest to go in there, poke it nice and firmly in, then lever back. It should pop out like so. It does take a couple tries sometimes, and you do have to poke the Delrin thing quite hard, but as you can see there, you've got the bung out with no damage to it. Okay, so now that the anti-tampers are off, we can move to the next stage. What you're going to need to do, I've already done this, but you're going to, without touching anything, regas the rifle. What you're going to do then is read the regulator set pressure on this gauge here and note it down. Once you've got that noted, what you're going to do is adjust this regulator out quarter turn at a time until you see this regulator gauge stop increasing. What this is going to do is tell you the set pressure of the front reg. You're going to need both of those set pressures for when we regas the rifle after rebuilding. Right, I hope that makes sense. Once you've got them two numbers, you can go ahead and degas the rifle again. This will be done by unscrewing the bottle and dry firing. If your rifle is unable to open the valve because of the heightened reg pressure, this one here, what you can do is very slowly unscrew this reg adjuster until it starts to hiss. the O-rings are designed so that they unseat before the thread disengages. The reg adjuster won't fire back at you. However, try dry firing first. Right, now that that's all out the way, we can start taking apart the regs. So I'm going to do the back one first, however, the order doesn't matter. So first off, we're going to be taking a 2.5mm Allen key and unscrewing the regulator adjuster. And there it is there. Next up is the body, and the body is a 5mm Allen key. And this just simply unscrews. Be careful when taking this out. Sometimes there's a Belleville washer on the bottom. Next up, we've got to get the piston out of the hole. What I use is a reg puller. I sell these on eBay, and it just goes in the hole, light press, then you can pull the reg out in one piece. So what I'll do is I'll put that Belleville back on, then put it back in the tool so the Bellevilles can't come out. And finally, looking down the hole, I can see that it's got the 10 by 1.5 MBR 90 in the bottom there. So the same as a impact and a crown. So now that that's all out of the way, what I'll do is I'll put the gun to one side and I'll bring back the regulator. Here's the regulator, all as it came out of the rifle. What I have beside me is a box filled with reg parts, and this is a standard FX one. This came out of a FX Impact, and if we look at the bodies are identical. There's only a small aesthetic change on the top, as the newer body uses this stepped, however the older one had just a flat top. So the bores are the same, and so are all the other dimensions. Right, so the bodies are the same. Next up is the adjuster screws. The top one is the one out of the Maverick, and the bottom one is one I have taken out of the Impact reg. And again, as we can see there, they're identical. Faces look the same, as does the size of the hole. Again, I'll double check all this off camera, but it all looks identical. So that was the top one, this one was the old one. And finally, the regulator piston. Now, when you take your regulator Bellevilles off, you always want to put them back in the same configuration. So again, this one is from the Maverick, and this one is from a kit. And as you can see there, pistons are identical. So there you have it. The regulator in the Maverick is exactly the same as the one that's found in the Crown, the Impact and the DreamTac, the bottle adapter version. We will be taking the bottle adapter one out as well, so stay tuned. Right, so I've just had a good measure up of everything, and everything is identical. The piston is exactly the same, as is the body and the adjuster screw. The only slight change may be in the Belleville configuration. So the Belleville spring configuration is what controls the upper and lower limits of the adjustment of the regulator. The thicker or harder these springs are, the more regulator pressure you are able to achieve. For sub 12 pound models, FX put in a lighter spring configuration than would be found on an FAC rifle. This regulator has 3 pairs of 0.4 and 2 pairs of 0.45 Belleville washers. This is a common UK configuration. The GRS Crown that I have has exactly the same configuration of Belleville washers. For FAC rifles, we would see 0.5 and 0.55 mm thick Bellevilles. The thickness of the washer, as I stated before, sets the upper and lower limits for adjustment, and having a lighter spring configuration gives us a finer adjustment between the lower set reg pressures. That's why in the UK versions the Belleville washers are smaller. So we both can't go as high as our reg pressure, as we don't need to, and so that we have a finer adjustment between, say, 60 and 70 or 50 and 60. It would be very hard with FAC configuration Bellevilles to get 55 bar as a set pressure, as the regulator adjuster screw would be extremely sensitive when you went to adjust it. Right, so you've already seen me change these O-rings in the FX impact regulator rebuild, so I won't go over it again. What I will do is just briefly tell you the sizes of each of the O-rings. So starting with the adjuster screw here, we have 2 by 1 by MBR 90s. Again, they have to be MBR 90s. And we have 2 of them. Next up, on the external of the body, this large one here, this is a 7.5 times 2 MBR 70. The internal one here and the external on the piston is a 4 by 1.5 MBR 70. And then the final O-ring is in the regulator body and it is a 10 by 1.5 by MBR 90. Right, so I'll get all these O-rings changed. I don't believe there's anything wrong with them, but just for peace of mind I'm going to change them anyway. And again, I do sell a kit of O-rings and tools on eBay. Right, so here's everything re-O-ringed and I've given everything a good clean. Next up is the reassembly. So we'll start with the piston. Here are my Bellevilles. I gave them a quick clean, removed any grease that was on them. The smallest or thinnest Belleville washer always goes at the bottom. Since we have 3 stacks of 0.4s, they are the ones that go on the piston first. Then the slightly thicker 0.45mm thicks on the end there. So that as a unit can go on the end of the tool with just a small amount of silicone oil on the piston O-ring at the bottom here. And as with the FX impact regulator rebuild, I did give the Belleville washers a little coat of dry lube. That's that stuff there. As I said before, all O-rings are the same, so changing them is exactly the same as the FX impact, even the one in the body. So with our tool we can simply put the piston in and let it find its seat in the bottom there, and when we pull it out, piston is left in the body of the gun. Next up is the housing, and again just a small amount of silicone oil on both the external and internal O-ring, and that can be just screwed back into the body. And then lastly is the adjuster screw, just a small amount of silicone oil on that as well. What we want to do with this is screw it down until it stops, then back it off a quarter of a turn, like so. Right, that's the rear reg done. Now it's time for the front reg. So I'll go a bit faster this time, as I've already covered it for the rear reg, but the procedure is exactly the same. First we take out the adjuster screw, put that to one side, then remove the body with a 5mm Allen key. Again, being careful in case there's a Belleville on the bottom. Next up, we use our tool, push that on, pull the piston out. Now this piston has the same 5 sets of Belleville washers, however I'll measure them and get you the sizes shortly. And lastly, I can see the body O-ring in the housing there. So this one as well looks identical to both the impact and the crown regulators. Right, so I've just had a measure of all the bellevilles and they are identical to the front ones. That is 3 sets of 0.4 and 2 sets of 0.45. Measuring the bellevilles, what we do is we take our calipers, just measure across the face like that for 6, and then one's 0.4. So this means that both the front reg and the rear reg has the same range of adjustment. And again, both regs are exactly the same as an impact or a crown regulator. No inferior parts, no changes to the regulators. Right, so I won't bore you again with showing you the O-rings and putting it back together. What I'll do is I'll get this installed in the rifle and then we'll talk about balancing the regulators. So I'll bring you back in a second. Right, that's both the regulators rebuilt. Now it's time to reset the pressure. Now I'm sure you've noticed that I've got different gauges on my rifle. What I did was I bought some cheap digital ones from AliExpress and I thought I'd try them out. The Maverick comes with these ones. These are super coarse and if I'm honest they're a bit hit and miss in their accuracy. So the gauges were going to be replaced anyway, so I thought I'd give these ones a try. So far they seem to be working quite well, however I will be doing a full review on them at a later date. So just to recap, we rebuilt the regs and then undone them quarter turn from touching the piston. What we're going to do now is regas the rifle and reset the regs. Right, I'm going to leave my rifle out of the chassis for now as it's a bit easier to manipulate for the camera, but if you're doing this at home, now would be the time to put the chassis on. It does have a hole to access the front reg, so you can still access it while the chassis is on. Right, so we're about to gas it up. To save a little time, what I've done is I've taken both regulator adjusters to just flush with the body. What this will do is cut out some of the low end adjustments and just make the whole process a little quicker. So as you can see on the gauge there, we're reading nothing, and the same is on the back one. Once we gas the rifle up, we're reading 144 on the gauge at the front and 57 on the rear. So what we've got to do now is juggle the two regs up till we reach the front reg set pressure. Now for my rifle the front reg was set at 80 bar, the rear one was set at 60 bar. It was 50 from the factory, but I upped it a little bit. So to do this, what we're going to be doing is adjusting the front reg out until the regulator gauge stops increasing, and then we're going to be taking this rear reg out until the gauge stops increasing again. What we're doing is we're setting the front reg first, then we'll degas the rifle and set the rear reg. So I'll show you the process. So as I said before, the rear reg is set to, well, it's jumped up to 58 now, but so undo that and the gauge hasn't moved. So this means the front reg is set lower than the rear reg now. So when we take this up, we hear the regulator open and the rear gauge is jumped up to just under 70 bar. Now we take the rear one up a little and the gauge hasn't moved. So we'll take the front one up a little more. So we're getting quite close to the 80 bar now, 78 on that gauge. So we'll just take this rear reg up a little more. And it hasn't moved. So this should be our final adjustment for the front reg. And there we have it, set at 80 bar. So what we've effectively done now is set the front reg at 80 bar and bypassed the second reg. Now comes the easy part. What we're going to do is degas the rifle, and without touching the front reg we're going to just concentrate on the back one. So I'll get this degassed and bring you back in a second. Both gauges reading empty. So now it's safe to screw in this back reg. What I did there was screwed it in till it stopped, then backed it out quarter turn. So we can now gas the rifle back up. We see we're at 124 in the front, and we're just about 2 bar at the back. The front gauge shows bottle pressure and the rear gauge shows regulator pressure. Next up, we only need to worry about this rear reg. We've set the front one at 80, now we've got to set the back one to 60. So that's just a case of watching the gauge and adjusting in the side. So one full turn gets us to 23. We're just slowly bringing the pressure up till we reach our desired pressure. Once we get close, I want to set my reg at 60 bar, and that's at 58. Once we get close, just do a couple dry fires just to settle the reg. As you can see there, the reg settled just a little lower. So a little more adjustment. And there we have it. Rear reg is now set at 60 bar. Right, so that's about it guys. That's rebuilding both regs and setting them back at the desired pressures. To give a quick recap, firstly we set the front reg. We do this by unscrewing this rear one until we see the regulator gauge stop increasing. Then we move to the front and increase this, i.e. unscrew it until we see the reg gauge stop moving. And then we go to the back and the front and just keep slowly joggling them up until we reach our set pressure. Once the set pressure on the front reg has been found, what we do then is degas the rifle by unscrewing and dry firing. Then once the gun is totally empty, we can then decrease the rear reg, i.e. screw it in till it touches the top of the piston, then back it out a quarter of a turn. At this point we can repressurise the rifle and then concentrate on the rear reg. We do this by ignoring the front one and just slowly increasing the rear reg whilst watching the pressure on the regulator gauge here. The FX manual states to keep a 20 to 30 bar difference between the regs, and from the factory the rear reg comes set at 50 and the front one comes set at 80. Okay, so I'll quickly put the chassis back on. It's pretty straightforward. What you do is line the chassis rail up. This hole needs to go in line with this, like so. It can be a little stiff at this rear, so you just need to give it a little wobble and a little bit of pressure, light pressure. It should find its way home. Then we take the smaller countersunk screw. This goes in the back. That's with a 3mm Allen key, and then the longer goes in the front. Okay guys, so two things I want to quickly mention before we go. Number one, once you're finished and happy with your rebuild of the two regulators and you've got them set where they need to be set, it's time to do a chrono test. You need to chrono test your rifle after rebuilding the regs to 1. Make sure that your power's okay, and number 2, to make sure there's nothing glaringly obvious wrong with the regulator. As I said in the impact video, you can't expect miracles right after a rebuild. It's got to have some time for the regulators to bed in properly and start working. And secondly, I just wanted to mention the cheek piece. Now, I've spoken to Sports Guns and they are waiting for the cheek pieces to come in. Apparently the shipments have been held up in customs, but they should be with us soon. So I just wanted to pass that information on. Right, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Hope you've enjoyed, maybe learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.